The streets of Baton Rouge, Louisiana boiled over this weekend as angry residents protested the shooting death of Alton Sterling by two officers who had him pinned to the ground. Hundreds of residents ended up getting arrested after police decked out in riot gear started trying to gain control of the streets.
We not out here to have no drama with the police or try to make it like we trying to hurt something or do something. We just out here for justice.
This stark image of an unarmed woman being swarmed by Baton Rouge police has gone viral and is being used to ask the question, are some police going too far? President Obama tried to provide context in an effort to balance legitimate anger in city neighborhoods with the concerns of police who feel that they are under assault.
In a movement like Black Lives Matter, there's always going to be some folks who say things that are stupid or imprudent or overgeneralize or are harsh. And I don't think that you can hold well-meaning activists who are doing the right thing and peacefully protesting responsible for everything that is uttered at a protest.
In Boston this weekend, protesters remained peaceful but still delivered a powerful message that change is needed.
For my brothers, they're black males and they've experienced police brutality before. One of my brothers was beaten up by a police officer and his eye got shattered.
I'm a teacher, and it's important for me to not only talk about how to build a better world for my students, but be involved.
How is it that we've avoided here the violent protests that wrecked so many other cities? Commissioner Evans had agreed to join us but canceled late this afternoon. Here to discuss the situation of Boston City Councilor Andrea Campbell. Councilor, thanks so much for being here. And President of the Boston branch of the NAACP, Michael Curry. Mike, thanks for you being here too. Something else President Obama said from Warsaw this weekend, we are not as divided as some have suggested. Is he right?
I think to a certain extent. We were just talking before we came on, Michael and I, about Commissioner Evans and the relationship, the positive relationship we have with him, his team, as well as the mayor and the other city councilors that I work with. I have a great relationship with them. And we
How about
all
big
agree,
picture, though? We all agree, I'm sorry, what?
We all agree that we have work to do. We all agree that the problem has to do with racism. And we may not always say that publicly, but we say that behind closed doors sometimes, and that we have work to do.
Racism on whose part?
Racism on the part of white people against black people. And in this particular context, since we're talking about Black Lives Matter, that's what we're talking about.
When you were quoted in the Globe recently talking about the whole police black men dynamic, and you describe it as the taint of race. What do you mean by that?
The taint of race. So we have the taint of race and how we do a lot of things, how we provide medical care, how we deal with housing and education. The taint of race is in our criminal justice system. The data is bearing that out. Reports are increasingly showing it in incarceration rates and the justice that's dispensed in our courts. And in this case, how our communities are policed. So if you perceive people as thugs and criminals, and if you think they live in dangerous communities and you go on with this heightened guard of, I need to get home to my families, then you might come across a Michael Curry and come off or arrest or treat me in a way that is unfair.
What do you think about the president's comment, again, nationwide, not in Boston so much, not as divided as some have suggested? Is he right?
I would disagree in many ways. I think the data shows that we are a very divided country. I think in terms of how we see race, how we see injustice, how we see opportunity. So we're divided in many ways. I mean, there's some great stories to tell about people working across racial lines, but there's a Ferguson in almost every city in this country. There's a Baltimore waiting to happen in almost every city where you have a disparate unemployment rate and poverty and poor schools and no housing and discrimination.
Let me add some data to your analysis, Michael Curry. The Pew Center did a study that's pretty troubling of how divided we are. People were asked if the country will ever reach racial equality. 75% of whites said yes, just 42% of blacks. Even more dramatic, have we reached that position of equality already? 40% of whites say yes, only 8%, which is virtually no blacks in this country, feel this way. Can I ever understand what life is like for someone whose skin is like yours and not mine, as hard as I might try, Counselor?
No. And what I mean, why I say it so emphatically is because I often say in order to truly understand someone's experience, you almost have to step into their shoes. And it's hard to do that. To be even, I think about my twin brother, and I often share his story about someone who died while in the custody of the Department of Correction. He was a black man, I'm a black woman. I did not relate always to his experiences growing up in the city of Boston, because I wasn't a black man growing up in the city of Boston. I listened and tried to understand what it felt like. I tried to have empathy and compassion, but at the end of the day, to really understand someone else's plight, we have to listen. We have to be open-minded, and we have to be understanding, compassionate, and empathetic all at the same time.
You know, we'd like to think that we're a lot of those things, but I think I was in, I was going to say knickers. I've never even used that expression in my whole life. I don't know where that came from. When I was a little kid, we've been talking about having a national conversation about race since I was smaller. Let's put it that way. Is the divide such that we can we're so polarized? There was a great piece in the Washington Post, Michael Curry, today or yesterday or something, saying one of the reasons that Barack Obama has not made more progress on this is unlike, for example, after 9/11, when people of all persuasions and all politics praised George W. Bush for his leadership. Immediately after 9/11, there's nothing that comes out of Barack Obama's mouth that the opposition will ever embrace. So can we ever have this conversation? Or are we just going to have a conversation about having the conversation till we're all dead and gone?
Yeah, I think we can have the conversation. I always make the comparison to a dysfunctional family, right? We've had abuse, neglect, and you name it in the family, and we just talk about getting together to resolve the issue. So it comes up once in a while when there's an incident and we have a surfacey, superficial conversation. Maybe we're at odds, and that's Rodney King, OJ, Ferguson, Baltimore, name it, and now the cases.
By the way, these numbers I read a minute ago are OJ-like. It's almost exactly the same as the percentage of blacks in America who thought he was not guilty, or at least should be found not guilty, as opposed to whites. That was 20 years ago.
Right. We're not there yet, and I think it's going to force us. Someone asked me the other day, they said, can we get to a place where we can calm this down? I said, I don't want calm. Right. I now want everyone on edge, and I want us to force ourselves to have a conversation that we keep avoiding, because otherwise we'll be here again.
Okay, let's hear from somebody who clearly is a little bit on edge. This is the former mayor of New York City, who once wanted to be president, talking about the role of Black Lives Matter in this whole debate or non-debate. Here's Giuliani.
It's inherently racist because, number one, it divides us. All lives matter. And when the presidential candidate, the governor of Maryland, made the statement that all lives matter, they intimidated him into changing it to Black Lives Matter. All lives matter. White lives, black lives, all lives.
Inherently racist is what he said, Black Lives Matter. What's your response, Counselor?
Once again, no. All lives matter. We all agree all lives matter. When we say Black Lives Matter, we're specifically talking about that data. The data that Wesley Lowery in the Washington Post put out and that he's going to put out later in his book that talks about if you're a black man, over 20 times more likely to be shot and killed by a police officer. This is real. If we're talking about just right here in the Commonwealth, looking at what's happening in our prisons and who is disproportionately affected by incarceration, by police brutality, it's black men and women. And brown men and women. And so that's what they're talking about, Black Lives Matter. And if we don't have appropriate responses, they're yelling it because obviously we're not paying attention because we're not holding folks accountable.
But you know when you say that somebody is sitting at home saying what I heard about 10,000 times this weekend. If you care deeply about what happened to Sterling and Castile, then you don't care about those dead cops in Dallas. If you care about the dead cops in Dallas, then you have a look on your face that it's preposterous. It's preposterous, but I heard it like it was on a loop throughout the weekend. So it's almost like people are talking at each other and never to each other.
So we see that playing out in presidential politics right now, right? Where there's no common sense to the conversation. We talk about immigration and so forth. We talk about this issue of, the whole issue of race and what people hear. We got to force people to pay attention. Giuliani doesn't even know what racism is, right? So if we're going to have a conversation about racism, let's start with understanding the basic terms so that he understands that Black Lives Matter is a direct result of those lives not mattering in almost every area you look at.
Let's come back to Boston, where you started a couple of minutes ago. Why have we avoided the horrors that we have seen in so many communities across this country, Mike?
Yeah, I think, it's a few factors, and the council and I talked about it. We are fortunate here. I often say we're not where we need to be or should be, but we have a police commissioner who's open and communicative, so we talk, we text. We have a police chief. We have a MBTA chief who's Chief Green, who we communicate all the time. We have a mayor who's open to having conversations. The reality, though, is it could happen tomorrow, because as long as you could have bad cops bad policy, bad practices, you could have an incident happen. And we have those things that happen here as well. So I think we shouldn't sit on that. We're not immune from those things.
Are you worried that we've been too slow on this whole body camera thing, which a lot of advocates say is a part of the solution? Not a big picture part, but at least a conduit to a solution.
Body cameras is one tool, and I'm all about getting things done and not wasting time. And why is that the case? Because frankly, people want to see things get done. If we acknowledge there's a problem, if we acknowledge police brutality or certain things are happening in our community, we need a response. And the best way to respond is by changing policy. Body cameras is one of them. People are waiting on that. I'm waiting on that. It's in negotiation with the unions. Looking at implicit bias training, looking at other things that we can do on the city level is important, including the state level as well. So we have some work to do.
Counselor, good to see you. Thank
You
you so
too.
much for your time.
Thank you.
Mike Curry, appreciate it.
Always a pleasure.
Will. See you soon. And again, Commissioner William Evans was supposed to join us, but he canceled late this afternoon.